November 26, 1926. Herstal, Belgium. A 71-year-old man collapses on the floor of the Fabrique Nationale factory. His heart stops before he hits the wood. He never stands back up. That man is John Moses Browning, the genius who gave the world the 1911 and the machine gun. He dies right there, next to his workbench. But on that desk, he leaves a time bomb. It's a stack of unfinished blueprints for a pistol that shouldn't exist yet. Nobody in the room knew it, but those papers were about to arm the Nazis, save British spies, and confuse historians for the next century. Browning didn't just leave a project unfinished. He left a puzzle that would accidentally create the deadliest handgun of World War II. You have to understand the math to get why this matters. In the 1920s, pistol combat was a death sentence because of one number, 7. The standard magazine for almost every army, from the American 1911 to the German Luger, held 7 or 8 rounds. That's it. You pull the trigger 8 times, and you are standing there holding a warm, empty piece of steel while the other guy shoots back. Reloading under fire feels like it takes an hour. Browning knew this. He was obsessed with one question before he died. How do you jam more bullets into a grip without making the gun feel like a brick? The project should have died with him, but his partner, a Belgian engineer named Dieudonné Saive, walks into that empty office. He picks up the papers. He decides to finish the job. He invents something that sounds boring but changes physics. The double-stack magazine. Before this, bullets sat in a straight line, one on top of the other. Saive staggered them. He forced them into a zigzag pattern, 2 columns squeezing into one. That single geometric tweak changed the capacity from 8 rounds to 13, plus 1 in the chamber. That is 14 trigger pulls. In 1935, when the gun finally launched as the high power, it wasn't just an upgrade, it was a cheat code. It was double the firepower of anything else on the battlefield. But history has a sick sense of humor. This weapon was designed for the Allies. It was supposed to defend the free world. Instead, the first people to use it in anger were the Nazis. May 10th, 1940. The German war machine smashes into Belgium. The country falls in 18 days. When the Wehrmacht marches into Herstal, they don't just take the land, they seize the factories. They kick down the doors of Fabrique Nationale and find the tooling for this 13-round monster. Now, usually the Germans look down on foreign weapons. They love their Lugers and their P-38s, but they took one look at the high power and realized it was superior. It held more ammo. It was simpler. So they hijacked the production line. They forced the Belgian machinists to stay at their stations with Mauser rifles pointed at their backs. They ordered them to crank out these pistols for the Third Reich. They renamed it the Pistole 640B. The B stood for Belgian, a stamp of ownership, and they didn't just make a few. By the end of the war, the Nazis had produced over 300,000 of them. They issued them to the elite, the Waffen-SS, the Fallschirmjäger paratroopers. The guys doing the hardest fighting were carrying a pistol designed by an American hero and built by Belgian prisoners. But while the Nazis are stealing the factory, Dieudonné Saive pulls a disappearing act. He manages to slip out of Belgium just ahead of the German dragnet. He flees to England, arriving with basically nothing but his memory and a few sketches. He walks into the Allied war offices in London and says, "I can build the best pistol in the world, but I need a factory." The British say no. It wasn't that they didn't want the gun. They were desperate. But every single machine shop in the UK was already at 100% capacity making Spitfire parts, Sten guns, and Lee Enfields. They couldn't spare a single lathe, so they point him across the ocean to the only place with industrial capacity left, Toronto, Canada. The John Inglis Company was an appliance factory. They made washing machines and pumps. Suddenly, they get a knock on the door and a contract to build the most advanced handgun in the world. This wasn't just copy and paste. The drawings were in metric. The Canadian machines were imperial. They had to reverse engineer the entire production line while the war was raging. But they pulled it off. The Inglis high power was born. They built 2 very different versions, and the difference tells you how confused the Allies were about what a pistol was actually for. The #1 model was built for a contract with China. The Chinese nationalists wanted a do-it-all weapon, so the #1 had a tangent rear sight marked out to 500 meters. Think about that. Aiming a handheld pistol at a target 5 football fields away. It also had a slot in the grip to attach a wooden shoulder stock. It was basically a carbine for people who couldn't afford rifles. But the number 2 model, that was the killer. Fixed sights, rough, Parkerized finish. No wood, no fancy adjustment knobs. Just a raw tool for close quarters combat. Canada pumped out over 150,000 of these things, rushing them to the front lines. This leads to the wildest crossover event of the war. Operation Varsity, March 1945. The largest single-day airborne drop in history. British and Canadian paratroopers drop into Germany. When they hit the ground, they pull out their Inglis high powers. The German paratroopers they are fighting pull out their Pistole 640 BBRs. They are shooting at each other with the exact same gun. If you ran dry, you could pick up a magazine off a dead Nazi and it would slide perfectly into your Canadian pistol. It was a supply chain miracle born from total theft. Now we have to kill a myth. If you watch movies or read old forums, you will hear that the high power was the most requested weapon of the French resistance. It fits the vibe, right? The cool, secret agent gun for the underground fighter. That is a lie. We have the supply manifests. We know exactly what the SOE and OSS dropped in those parachute canisters. In June 1944, the Allies dropped about 8,800 pistols to the French resistance. But in that same month, they dropped nearly 10,000 Sten guns. They dropped 2,000 Bren guns. They dropped bazookas. Think about the reality of a resistance fighter. You are a civilian wearing a coat. You are ambushing a truck full of German soldiers. Do you want a pistol? No. A pistol is a defensive weapon. It is the oh no button. If you are attacking a convoy with a handgun, you are going to die. The resistance begged for Stens. The Sten gun cost $10 to make. It looked like a plumber's nightmare. It rattled. It was ugly, but it sprayed 9mm full auto. That dominates a road. A pistol does not. The resistance took the high powers if they got them, tucked them into a waistband, and hoped they never had to use them. So why is the gun legendary? Because of the people who did need it. The spies, the SOE agents, the Jedburgh teams, the men and women operating alone. For a spy in Paris, the war isn't a battlefield. It's a sidewalk. It's a cafe. You are trying to blend in. You can't hide a Sten gun under a jacket. You need something small, but if your cover gets blown, you are in a panic situation. The world shrinks to 5 meters. In that moment, the British standard issue Webley revolver is a liability. It holds 6 shots. To reload it, you have to break the frame open, shake out the empty shells, and put new bullets in one by one. If your hands are shaking with adrenaline, that takes 10 seconds. 10 seconds is an eternity when someone is shooting at you. The high power changed the math. It gave that agent 13 rounds. That's double the attempts to save your life. And the reload? Press a button, the empty mag drops, slap a new one in. You are back in the fight in 1 second. That speed is what made it the favorite of the SOE. It wasn't about stopping power. It was about the margin of error. It allowed you to miss, suppress the enemy, and run away. And because it fired 9mm, you could scavenge. The Germans used 9mm in their MP40s and their Lugers. If you were deep behind enemy lines and ran out of ammo, you didn't have to wait for airdrop. You could steal bullets from the enemy. That is a logistical superpower. That utility is why the gun refused to die. Most World War II weapons, the Garand, the Thompson, the MP40, became museum pieces by the 1950s. The high power stayed on the hip. The British Army officially adopted it after the war as the L9A1. They kept it for decades. The SAS, the guys in black masks kicking down doors, they swore by it. Fast forward to 1980, the Iranian embassy siege in London. This is the modern era. We have MP5s, we have body armor. The SAS abseils down the building on live TV. And what sidearm are they carrying? The Browning high power. 50 years after it was designed, it was still the go-to tool for the most elite counter-terror unit on Earth. It served in over 50 countries. It fought in the Falklands on both sides. Argentine officers carried them. British officers carried them. It fought in Vietnam. It fought in the Cold War. It outlived the British Empire. It outlived the Nazis. It outlived almost everyone who worked on it. And it all traces back to that Friday in 1926. A 71-year-old man dying on a factory floor, trying to solve a geometry problem. John Moses Browning didn't know he was designing the weapon that would be used against his own country's soldiers. He didn't know it would be built by washing machine makers in Canada. He didn't know it would become the symbol of the SAS. He just wanted to make a gun that didn't run dry after 7 shots. And in doing that, he accidentally built the blueprint for the modern world. Look at a Glock today. Look at a Sig Sauer. They are all high-capacity, double-stack 9mm pistols. They are all the children of the high power. So the next time someone tells you it was just a useless vintage pistol, tell them the real story. Tell them about the dead man, the stolen factory, the Canadian clones, and the paratroopers dropping into Germany carrying the enemy's gun. That is the documented reality. And that is a hell of a lot more interesting than the myth.